My parents dragged me to court, claiming I stole my grandfather's legacy. The first sound I hear every morning is the soft hum of my coffee grinder. While the rest of the house still sleeps, I stand in the quiet kitchen, inhaling the scent of fresh beans. For most people, it's just another routine. It's a ritual, a reminder of everything I've built with my own hands. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 41 years old, and I own Harbor Brew Coffee, a chain of 17 coffee shops spread from Seattle to Denver. Whenever someone sees the dark green sign with the golden anchor or catches the aroma of roasted beans drifting down a city block, that's me. That's my life's work. From the outside, it looks perfect. My wife Clara teaches at a local elementary school, and our two children, Sophie and Max, bring more laughter into the house than I ever thought possible. We live in a modest suburban home with a garden Clara insists on filling with roses. At night, when she reads stories to Sophie and Max, I sometimes sit in the hallway just to listen. In moments like that, I feel a peace I once believed I'd never know. It wasn't always like this. For years, my life was shadowed by bitterness, betrayal, and a family who treated me as if I were nothing more than a resource to be drained. I thought I had escaped them, thought that by building something of my own, I had severed the chains that bound me to the past. For more than a decade, I almost believed it. But peace is fragile. It only takes one sound to break it. For me, it was the doorbell ringing at 5 in the morning, sharp and insistent, on a cold March day. When I opened the door and saw what was waiting on the porch, I knew my past had found me again. And to understand why that moment changed everything, you need to know the family I left behind. To understand why that knock on the door felt like the echo of an old nightmare, you need to know where I came from. My childhood home in Dallas was not a place of balance or fairness. It was a stage where one actor received all the praise and another was left standing in the shadows. My parents, Richard and Elaine, built their lives around my older brother, Victor. He was born fragile, premature, and doctors warned he might face challenges in school. From that moment on, he became the center of their world. Every achievement of his, no matter how small, was celebrated like a miracle. A B on a math test earned him a cake. A goal in a soccer game, even when his team lost, was treated like victory at the World Cup. And me? I was expected to excel because Ethan is strong. Ethan doesn't need as much. My A+ exams drew a tired nod. My academic awards collected dust on a shelf no one bothered to look at. I remember standing in the living room once, clutching a certificate that proved I had the highest grades in my entire grade level. My father glanced at it for 3 seconds, muttered "Good, keep it up," and turned back to the television. Moments later, Victor walked in and announced he'd been chosen as backup for a school baseball team. My mother screamed with joy, hugging him as if he'd just won a national title. That was the rhythm of my life. Silence for me, applause for him. I didn't grow bitter, at least not right away. Instead, I poured myself into discipline. I studied harder, worked part-time jobs, saved every dollar I could, while Victor demanded new sneakers or video games. I was driving a used car that rattled every time I turned. The key, by the time I was 27, I had managed to save $400,000. Not an inheritance, not a gift, but the product of grueling hours and careful investments. That money was my shield against uncertainty, my proof that I could survive without anyone's help. I told no one about it, not my parents, not even my closest friends. But secrets rarely stay buried. One night, while visiting home, I left my laptop open. Victor used it to check his email, and when I came back from the kitchen, I saw him staring at my account balance with wide, hungry eyes. His voice trembled when he asked, "You have that much money?" In that moment, I knew everything would change, and it did. Within days, my parents summoned me into my father's study. On the desk was a thick folder marked with Victor's newest business idea. They didn't ask, they demanded. My savings, they said, were meant to give Victor the chance he deserved. I was told this was a family duty, that refusing would mean I was turning my back on blood that night. My world split apart. The night my parents called me into my father's study is etched into my memory with painful clarity. The room smelled of cigar smoke and old leather, a place where decisions were made and judgments delivered. On the desk sat a folder thick with papers, its cover stamped with the words Lone Star Real Estate Development. Victor stood to the side, his arms crossed, trying to look confident, but his eyes darted nervously from me to our father. My father's voice was cold, commanding. He didn't ask how I was, didn't congratulate me for what I had managed to achieve on my own. Instead, he said, "It's time you did your part for this family. You'll give Victor the $400,000 you've been hoarding. He's ready to start a real estate company, and this is the chance to secure all our futures." I froze. The words barely made sense at first. $400,000. 12-hour workdays, years of living frugally, every dollar invested carefully. All of it, the product of a decade of sacrifice, was being reduced to a share in Victor's. Next, gamble. I tried to reason with them. I reminded my father of Victor's history, how he had already burned through money on failed ventures, the auto repair shop that collapsed in 8 months, the burger restaurant that lasted half a year before shutting its doors. Each time, my parents had smoothed over the failure with excuses: bad timing, bad luck, unfair partners. Never once had they admitted the truth. Victor lacked the discipline to see anything through. I said no. Firm, clear, final dot. The room erupted. My father's face darkened, veins rising in his neck as he shouted, "You selfish, ungrateful boy! We gave you life, and now you refuse us when we need you." My mother's voice cracked as she wept. "How can you be so heartless, Ethan? He's your brother. Blood should mean something." And then Victor, who had always hidden behind their words, spoke up for the first time. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "I never thought my own brother could be this cold. You've always hated me, haven't you? Always wanted to watch me fail." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them again the truth, that the money was mine, earned through sweat, not given by them, and I would not throw it into another one of Victor's black holes. That's when my father snapped. He grabbed my coat, hurled it into the yard, and pointed at the door. "Get out. Don't come back until you're ready to be a real son." It was raining outside, a cold, steady downpour that soaked me before I reached the car. I remember standing in the driveway, shivering, looking back at the window where their silhouettes stood watching. My mother turned her face away. My father slammed the blinds shut. And Victor, still inside, smirked as if he had finally won. I drove off that night without a destination. The streets were empty, but my mind was louder than it had ever been. I replayed every memory of being second best, of being overlooked, of carrying the weight they ignored. For the first time in my life, I felt like an orphan with living parents, and yet, even in that darkness, there was one person who hadn't abandoned me. One man who had seen me, believed in me, and who would soon change the course of my life forever. My grandfather, Henry. After I was cast out, there was only one place I could think to go: my grandfather's house. Henry Miller lived in a small, brick home on the east side of Dallas, a modest place filled with the smell of roasted coffee and the steady tick of an old grandfather clock. It was close to midnight when I arrived, soaked from the rain, exhausted from the storm of voices that had just thrown me out of my own family. When he opened the door, he didn't ask questions. He simply looked at me, saw the pain in my eyes, and pulled me into his arms. "Come inside, son," he said quietly, and in that moment, I felt more warmth than I had felt in years. That night, I sat in his kitchen, the faint aroma of coffee beans still lingering from his evening brew. I told him everything: the discovery of my savings, the demands, the shouting, the way I had been pushed out into the rain. He listened without interruption, his weathered hands folded on the table, his eyes steady. When I finished, he spoke, with a calm certainty that cut through the chaos still echoing in my mind. "You did the right thing, Ethan. That money is yours. You earned it. No one has the right to take it from you, not even family. Sometimes protecting yourself is the only way to survive." Those words became my anchor. For the next 4 years, he was the only family I had. He checked on me every week, listened to my worries, reminded me that blood alone doesn't define loyalty. He was the one voice in my life that never asked for anything, never judged, only guided. Then, at 31, I lost him. He passed in his sleep, peacefully, but when I got the call, it felt as though the last light in my world had gone out. At his funeral, I sat in the back pew while my parents and Victor filled the front row. They never looked at me, not even once. We're strangers mourning the same man. A week later, we gathered at the office of Mr. Thompson, my grandfather's attorney, for the reading of the will. The air was thick with tension. My father leaned back with his arms folded. My mother clutched her purse like it was a lifeline, and Victor tapped his foot, barely able to contain his impatience. The distribution was announced. The house, with its small garden and decades of memories, went to my parents. Victor received $250,000 in savings. Their faces lit up with satisfaction, their whispers quick and excited. Then Mr. Thompson turned. "To me, all that remains for Ethan," he said, "is this envelope." The room erupted in quiet laughter. My father smirked. My mother shook her head with pity. Victor leaned back with a smug grin. "Looks like you finally got what you deserve," my father muttered. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in my grandfather's handwriting and a worn leather notebook. My heart pounded as I read the first line. "This is the recipe I spent my life perfecting. It is more than a formula for coffee, it is a philosophy. Be patient with the beans, as you must be patient with life. Treat them with care, as you must treat people. Use this, and you will build something that lasts." I turned the page of the notebook. Precise instructions filled each sheet: roasting temperatures, grind sizes, water ratios, even notes about sourcing beans from regions he trusted. It was his life's work passed down to me. But there was more. Mr. Thompson handed me another document, a separate account quietly established in my name, $1.8 million, money my grandfather had saved from his pension and investments hidden so my parents could never touch it. As the number left the attorney's lips, the room went silent. My parents froze, their smiles evaporating. Victor's jaw dropped, his face drained of color, and I sat there in stunned silence, tears welling in my eyes, as I realized what my grandfather had done. He had seen me. He had seen the boy who was overlooked, the young man who was cast out, the son who worked alone to carve a future. And he had left me not just money, but a message that I was worthy, that my effort, my pain, my resilience had meaning. For the first time in my life, I felt truly validated, not because of what I had, but because someone had believed in me enough to entrust me with his legacy. That night, when I drove home with the envelope and the bank documents beside me, I knew my life was about to change forever. My grandfather had given me the tools and the means to build something greater than myself, and that is exactly what I set out to do. The day I walked out of my grandfather's attorney's office with his recipe and that hidden inheritance, I felt as if my life had been split into two halves: the boy they had discarded and the man I was about to become. I had a choice. I could keep the money safe, tucked away in accounts, or I could use it to build something lasting, something worthy of the man who believed in me when no one else did. I chose to build. I resigned from my consulting job in Seattle. Ignoring the surprise on my boss's face when I handed him the letter, he tried to persuade me with promises of promotions and raises, but my decision had already been made. I wasn't going to spend my life making someone else rich. I was going to create a legacy of my own. The search for the first location took weeks. I drove through the city every night, scanning neighborhoods, walking empty streets, scribbling notes about foot traffic, office buildings, and corner spots. One afternoon, on a gray November day, I found it. A small storefront near Pike Street. The rent was high, the space narrow, and the floors slanted, but there was something about it that felt right. I signed the lease without hesitation. Renovation drained my patience and tested my resolve. The contractors were late. The espresso machine I ordered arrived damaged. Even the city permit office delayed my license, burying me in paperwork. At night, I sat on the dusty floor of that empty shop, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, and asked myself if I was out of my mind. But every time doubt crept in, I pulled out my grandfather's notebook. I read his handwriting by the light of a single bulb, hearing his steady voice in my head. Be patient with the beans, as you must be patient with life. That notebook kept me moving forward. I poured everything into creating an atmosphere that felt warm and alive. Wooden tables sanded by hand, soft amber lighting, a chalkboard menu written in my own script. On the front wall, I hung a sign carved in dark oak with gold lettering. The name came easily: Harbor Brew. A harbor is where You return when the seas are rough, a place of safety, a beginning and an end. That was what I wanted my coffee shop to be. Opening day came on a Monday morning in December. I unlocked the doors with shaking hands and waited. The first hour, not a single customer walked in. My heart sank as I wiped the same counter over and over, pretending to stay busy. Then, a man in a gray suit pushed the door open. He ordered a black coffee. I followed my grandfather's recipe step by step, poured it into a porcelain cup, and held my breath. He took one sip, paused, and then smiled. "This," he said, "tastes like the coffee I had in Europe years ago. I'll be back tomorrow." The moment felt like the spark of a fire. Slowly, word spread. Office workers stopped by on their way to work. Students carried their laptops inside and stayed for hours. Within 6 months, I was breaking even. Within a year, I had lines forming in the mornings. The risk, the sleepless nights, the fights with contractors, it all began to make sense. I opened a second location the following year, then a third. Each one was a battle. There were weeks I thought I would collapse under the pressure of payroll and rent. I had nights where I stared at spreadsheets, terrified that one wrong decision would bring it all crashing down. But every time, I fought, through, driven by the memory of my grandfather's trust. 8 years later, Harbor Brew had grown into a chain of 17 shops across 4 states. The green anchor sign was no longer just mine, it belonged to the baristas who poured their passion into every cup, to the customers who came back day after day, to the community that had made space for me when my own family never had. In those years, I also found love. I met Clara at a local fundraiser, a woman with an easy smile and a heart big enough to heal others. We married, and soon Sophie and Max came along, filling our home with noise and joy. For the first time in my life, I felt I had a real family, one built not on manipulation or favoritism, but on respect and love. I thought the past was behind me. I thought the ghosts of Dallas had finally faded. But while I was building something beautiful, the family I had left behind was destroying itself, one reckless decision at a time. While Harbor Brew was expanding and my home was filled with laughter, my old family was unraveling piece by piece. I didn't hear it from them directly, of course not. For years, silence had been their only form of communication with me. But stories have a way of slipping through, whispered by distant relatives, carried by old acquaintances, or hinted at in the voices of people who still lived near Dallas. I learned that after my grandfather's house was passed to them. My parents wasted no time turning it into cash. $950,000. That home, the one he had nurtured for decades, the garden he tended with careful hands, the walls filled with the smell of his coffee, gone in a single transaction. They poured nearly every cent into Victor's latest dream, a tech company he claimed would revolutionize online retail. For a while, he played the part of a rising entrepreneur. He bought a flashy car, wore expensive watches, and held meetings in rented office spaces. My parents bragged to neighbors that their son was on the verge of becoming the next great business leader. They believed, as they always had, that this time would be different. But the truth was the same as it had always been. The company bled money. Contracts fell through. Investors backed out. By the third year, it was clear the project was collapsing. Instead of cutting losses, Victor doubled down. He borrowed heavily, not from banks, no. Bank would touch him after the numbers came out. From private lenders. Men who didn't operate with patience or forgiveness. Men who charged interest that grew like weeds and who collected debts with more than letters and phone calls. By the time I heard, Victor owed more than $2.5 million. My parents, desperate to protect him, sold what little remained. The retirement accounts they had built, gone. Their last savings, drained. They moved from the comfortable neighborhood they once flaunted into a cramped apartment complex in a part of town no one felt safe walking through after dark. The collapse wasn't quiet. Neighbors talked about debt collectors showing up at their door. Some described shouting matches on the front lawn, men in leather jackets pounding on the windows, demanding payment. My mother, once so proud, was seen begging them for time. My father, who had once thrown me out with such authority, was now reduced to a man pacing in fear, knowing each knock could mean another threat, and yet, through it all, their pride never bent. Not once did they call me, not once did they admit. what had happened. To them, I didn't exist until the moment they decided they needed me again. I should have felt satisfaction when I heard the stories. A part of me did, after all. Hadn't they chosen this path? Hadn't they mocked me, dismissed me, pushed me aside in favor of Victor's endless failures? But another part of me felt only sorrow. I had built a life from nothing, had taken something whole and burned it to ashes. I thought the downfall would keep them away for good, that they would finally realize the cost of their blind favoritism. I was wrong. Their collapse was not the end of the story, it was only the beginning of their return, because in the spring of last year, after more than a decade of silence, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen since the night they cast me out. My father was calling. It was a Thursday evening when the past found its way back into my life. I was sitting at the kitchen table with Clara, helping Sophie with her math homework. When my phone buzzed, the number on the screen made my chest tighten. It was my father's. A number I hadn't seen flash across my phone in more than 10 years. For a long moment, I didn't move. Clara glanced at me, sensing the shift in my expression. She placed her hand gently on mine and whispered, "Answer it if you want, but only if you want." I pressed accept. Ethan's voice was rougher, thinner, but still carried that edge of command I remembered too well. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about my family. He went straight into it. "It's your father. I don't have much time, the doctors say. Late-stage lung cancer. They've given me 2 months, maybe less." The words sank into me like ice. Cancer. 2 months. For years, I had told myself I didn't care, that they were strangers to me. Now, but hearing those words, I felt something stir that I couldn't ignore. Anger, grief, guilt all tangled together. He told me he wanted to see me one last time. "Don't let it end like this," he said. "Come home, Ethan. Your mother needs you. Victor needs you. We need you." Clara stayed awake with me, listening as I paced the room. "What if it's true?" I said. "What if he really is dying and I don't go?" She met my eyes, steady and calm. "Or what if it's another lie, like every lie before? Don't walk back into their trap unless you're ready." By morning, I had made my choice. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. 2 days later, I drove back to Dallas. The old neighborhood looked the same: quiet streets, manicured lawns, but when I pulled up to my parents' smaller house, I felt an unease settle over me. I braced myself for the sight of a frail man clinging to life. Instead, I found my father sitting in his armchair, perfectly healthy, a glass of whiskey in one hand and the morning paper in the other. His color was good, his posture steady, not a trace of illness. When he saw me, he stood quickly, as if to prove his strength. In that instant, the truth hit me. I had been deceived again. My mother sat on the sofa, wringing her hands, eyes darting away from mine. There was no sorrow in the room, no signs of a family preparing to say goodbye. There was only calculation. They let the silence hang until my father finally spoke. "We didn't bring you here under false pretenses, son. We brought you here because this family is in crisis. Victor is drowning in debt. 2.6 million. And you," his eyes locked on mine, "you're the only one who can save him." I stared at them, unable to believe what I was hearing. After everything, after the years of silence, after the lies, they had dragged me back with a fabricated deathbed just to ask for money. Victor stepped into the room. He looked like a ghost of himself, thinner, pale, dark circles under his eyes. His hands shook as he spoke. "I never wanted this, Ethan. I wanted to live up to what they believed about me. Every failure pushed me deeper, and I couldn't. Admit it. Please, help me. If the lenders don't get their money soon, I don't know what they'll do." For a moment, I wavered. His voice didn't carry arrogance this time. It carried desperation. I remembered being young, being told I was strong enough to fend for myself while he was coddled. Maybe he really had lived his whole life under a weight he could never carry. Then my mother spoke, and the spell broke. "Think of Sophie and Max," she said, her tone dripping with guilt. "They deserve to know their grandparents, to know their uncle. Family is sacred, Ethan. Don't rob them of that." It was the same tactic as always. Twist the knife of obligation. Make me doubt myself, make me feel guilt. Clara's warning echoed in my mind. If you give in once, they will never stop. There will always be a next time. I looked at the three faces across from me, my father still burning with stubborn pride, my mother pretending her tears were love instead of manipulation. My brother, broken by choices he refused to own, and I realized this was the crossroads. Whatever decision I made here would define not just my future, but my children's. I took a deep breath. "My children already have a family," I said quietly. "They have me. They have Clara." "That's enough." The words landed like a hammer. My mother froze. Victor lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. My father's face flushed crimson. Fury replacing the false frailty he had staged. He pointed a trembling finger at me and shouted, "Ungrateful! You are no son of mine. You never were." But this time, his rage didn't cut me down. It only proved what I had known all along. Nothing I did would ever be enough for them. I stood, steady, unshaken, and walked toward the door. Behind me, their voices rose pleas, threats, curses all blurring together. I stepped outside into the cool evening air, leaving them in the house that had once been my prison. What I didn't know then was that this confrontation was only the beginning. Their desperation had no bottom, and soon they would strike back in a way that would drag me into a battle I could not avoid. The moment the words left my mouth, the room turned into a battlefield. My children already have a family. They have me, they have Clara. That's enough. For a split second, there was silence, the kind that comes right before a storm. Then it hit. My father shot up from his chair, his face twisted with rage. His hand trembled as he jabbed a finger in my direction. "You ungrateful bastard. We gave you life, we sacrificed for you, and this is how you repay us. A little money, and you think you're better than us." His voice cracked, but not from weakness only, from the sheer volume of his fury. My mother lunged forward, her voice shrill and shaking, tears spilling down her face. "Ethan, please, think about your brother. Think about what they'll do. To him, if he can't pay, you'll let your own flesh and blood die while you sit in your fancy house drinking coffee like a king." And then Victor broken, desperate Victor, collapsed at my feet. He grabbed the hem of my coat and clung to it like a drowning man. His voice cracked as he sobbed. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan. I don't have your strength. I never did. Please, don't let them destroy me." His tears soaked into the fabric, his shoulders shaking violently. I looked down at him, and for a fleeting moment, I almost faltered. Almost because beneath the tears, I saw what I had always seen. A man who had never once taken responsibility for his choices. A man who expected the world to catch him every time he jumped headfirst into ruin. I pulled my coat free from his grasp. "I'm sorry, Victor, but I won't set myself on fire to keep you warm." The line seemed to break something in him. He crumpled to the floor, his sobs turning into incoherent muttering. My mother rushed to his side, clutching him like a child, rocking him back and forth. My father, meanwhile, grew more violent with every passing second. "You think this is over?" he roared. "You think you can walk away from this family and wash your hands clean? I'll make sure the world knows what kind of man you are. You'll regret this, Ethan. You'll regret ever crossing me." He moved toward me as if he might strike me. For a moment, I saw the shadow of the man who had thrown me out all those years ago, standing in the rain with nothing but a suitcase. But I wasn't 27 anymore. I wasn't the boy begging to be seen. I was a man who had built his own name, his own life, his own family, so I didn't flinch. I simply met his eyes and said, "Respect isn't owed just because of blood. It's earned, and you never earned mine." Then I turned and walked out the door. Behind me, the chaos raged on, my mother's wailing, Victor's broken sobs, my father's curses echoing through the walls. But as I stepped outside into the evening air, the noise began to fade. With every step toward my car, I felt lighter, as if chains I'd carried since childhood were finally falling away. I thought that was the end, that my refusal, as final as it was, had severed the last tie between us. I thought they would never call again, never try again, but I underestimated their desperation, because less than a week later, I received a letter from the county court. They hadn't just lashed out in anger, they had declared war. The summons arrived on a gray morning, slipped under my office door like a silent threat. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, but when I tore the envelope open, I felt my stomach drop. My parents and Victor had filed a lawsuit against me. The accusations were brutal. They claimed my grandfather had been mentally incompetent when he wrote his will. They said I had manipulated him, that I had taken advantage of his love to secure money that should have been shared. According to them, Harbor Brew itself was born of fraud. I sat in my office, staring at the pages, my hands shaking. All the years I had spent honoring my grandfather's legacy, all the sweat, the nights of doubt, the endless hours of work, they were trying to stain it with lies. I hired Jennifer Cole, a seasoned inheritance lawyer with a reputation for tearing false claims apart. She was calm, sharp, and unshakable. After reading the complaint, she looked at me with steady eyes and said, "They think they can break you with noise and paper. Well, answer with facts." The trial began 2 months later in a packed courthouse. Reporters filled the benches. Neighbors and distant relatives came to watch. To them, it must have looked like a drama too strange to ignore. A successful businessman being dragged into court by his own family. My father testified first. He sat tall, projecting authority, his voice heavy with practiced indignation. He told the court, my grandfather had grown confused in his final years, forgetting conversations, misplacing items. He said it was suspicious that such a large sum went to me and not to the family who had cared for him daily. My mother followed, tears running down her cheeks as she described me as a manipulator who twisted the heart of an old man. Then came Victor. He took the stand with his head bowed, his voice weak and cracking. He painted himself as the overlooked son, cheated of his rightful inheritance by a cunning brother who had always resented him. The words stung, not because they were true, but because he delivered them with such sincerity that I almost believed he had convinced himself. Their lawyer leaned into the performance, pacing in front of the jury, hammering the point that, no, rational grandfather would leave nearly $2 million to one grandson, and so little to the rest of the family. It doesn't add up, he said. It smells of manipulation. When it was our turn, Jennifer dismantled their story piece by piece. She called my grandfather's longtime physician, who testified that Henry Miller had been mentally sharp until the day he died. He read the newspaper daily, managed his finances, remembered details better than I did, the doctor said firmly. Next came Mr. Thompson, the attorney who had drafted the will. He told the court under oath that Henry was lucid, deliberate, and unwavering in his decisions. The neighbor who had often visited my grandfather, she described evenings spent with him, conversations about life and legacy. He loved Ethan, she said plainly. But the moment that changed everything came during cross-examination of Victor. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice quiet but precise. Mr. Miller, you testified that your grandfather favored your brother unfairly, correct? Victor nodded, hesitating. Yes, favored him, she repeated. So you admit your grandfather's decision was consistent with how he treated Ethan throughout his life? Victor's eyes flickered. He realized too late what he had conceded. He tried to recover, but the damage was done. His words had confirmed the very logic behind the inheritance. Even the judge leaned back, his expression shifting. By the time closing arguments were delivered, their case was in pieces. Jennifer reminded the jury of the medical records, the testimony, the decades of favoritism reversed in one deliberate act. This wasn't fraud, she said. The inheritance and Harbor Brew remained mine. The judge went further, calling the lawsuit baseless and malicious. My parents and Victor were ordered to pay court costs, a humiliation that left them pale and silent as the gavel fell. When I stepped out of that courthouse, the cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, but I felt only one thing: vindication. My grandfather's trust had been defended. His legacy was safe. For the first time, I believed the war was over. Max, without ever hearing their voices again. But peace never lasts long in my story. Because just when I thought the storm had passed, a knock at the door at dawn reminded me that the past was not finished with me yet. When the verdict was read and the gavel came down, it felt as if a weight I had carried for most of my life had finally been lifted. For months after the trial, my phone was quiet. No late-night threats, no manipulative pleas, no poisonous words meant to cut me down. My parents and Victor had vanished into silence, their humiliation to public. Rhythm of customers, the green anchor sign becoming more familiar on city streets. Employees who had once been baristas were now managers, proud of the work they'd built alongside me. On weekends, I'd take Sophie and Max to one of the shops. Let them sit behind the counter and hand out pastries. their faces glowing as if they owned the place themselves. It wasn't just my business anymore, had become part of my family's story. At home, peace finally felt real. Evenings became rituals of laughter and small joys, board games on the living room floor. Clara reading bedtime stories, Sophie sneaking into the kitchen for one last cookie. Nights like that, I would stand at the window, looking out over our quiet street, and whisper a silent thank you to my grandfather. His legacy hadn't just built a business, it had given me the life I had once thought impossible. There were still moments when the past tugged at me. A familiar face in Dallas would pass along scraps of news. My parents had sold off what little remained. Victor had disappeared from the public eye, the family name now whispered with shame rather than pride. Part of me ached at the thought. Another part felt only relief. Their choices were no longer my burden to carry. I told myself the chapter was closed. It has a way of slipping through your fingers the moment you start to believe it will last. Because one morning, long before the sun rose, I was pulled out of sleep by the sound of the doorbell ringing. Sharp, urgent, insistent, the kind of knock that doesn't belong to a neighbor or a friend. I went to the door, half expecting nothing but shadows in the dawn dot instead. No older than 4. Her eyes were wide, frightened, and she clutched a worn teddy bear to her chest, and in her tiny hand was an envelope, a small figure, barefoot, on the cold porch, shivering in thin pajamas. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Her eyes were wide and searching, her lips trembling as she held on to a threadbare teddy bear like it. It was the only anchor she had left in the world. In her other hand was an envelope. The handwriting on the front struck me harder than the chill. In the morning air, it was my mother's bold, slanted letters I hadn't seen in years. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She blinked at me, her voice so soft, I almost didn't catch it. Lila Clara appeared behind me, her robe wrapped tightly around her, eyes widening at the sight of the girl. Without a word, she scooped Lila into her arms and carried her inside, her instincts as a teacher and a mother taking over. I remained on the porch, the envelope burning in my hands. Inside, under the glow of the kitchen light, I unfolded the letter. Each word was a dagger. "Ethan, this is your niece, Lila. She is Victor's daughter. Her mother has abandoned her. Victor has disappeared. We are too old, too weak, too poor to care for her. You are her only chance. We are signing over guardianship to you. Please, don't let her disappear into the system. Whatever you feel about us, she is innocent. Do this one thing. Legally binding." The responsibility was mine if I chose to accept it. I sat at the table, staring at the paper, my mind a storm of conflict. This was their final move, their last attempt to bind me to them. They had used lies, manipulation, lawsuits. Now they were leaving me with flesh and blood, a child who had no say in the wreckage she had been born into. Clara placed a hand on mine. Her voice was gentle, but steady. "She's just a little girl, Ethan. She didn't ask for any of this." In the living room, Sophie had wrapped her arm around Lila, showing her a stack of picture books. Max offered her one of his toy cars, his face serious, as if he knew she needed it more than he did. Watching them, my heart broke. I called Child Protective Services that morning. They came, confirmed the documents, explained the choices. If I said no, Lila would enter the foster system, passed from one family to another, her future uncertain. If I said yes, she would stay here with us. That night, Clara and I sat awake long after the children had fallen asleep. I thought about my grandfather's words about what real family meant. I thought about the boy I used to be, standing in the rain with nothing but a suitcase, cast out by the very people who should have protected me. It was Maid. When I looked in on her the next morning, she was curled up beside Sophie, her teddy bear clutched tight, her breathing slow and even. For the first time, she looked at peace. I knew then that I couldn't let her down. I couldn't let her live the life I had once lived and wanted. Unseen dot, the cycle ended here, in the end. But by love and the choices we make to protect the innocent, Harbor Brew was built from my grandfather's trust, and now my life is built on the promise that the cycle of neglect ends with me. If this story made you stop and think, if it pulled you in the way it pulled me back through every dark corner of my past, then don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and share it with someone who believes, like I do, that real family is chosen.